John Wayne Gacy's early life was marked by a tumultuous family dynamic and personal struggles that would later shape his psychological development down the road. Born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, Gacy was the second of three children and the only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. His father, a World War I veteran, struggled with alcoholism and subjected young John to frequent verbal and physical abuse. And this abusive relationship just set a precedent for the toxic dynamic that would persist throughout Gacy's childhood and adolescence. And the paternal abuse Gacy endured was not merely sporadic. It was a constant presence in his formative years. Not a good start. His father consistently belittled him and drew unfavorable comparisons between John and his sisters. And this persistence of degradation had a very profound impact on Gacy's self-esteem and his perception of masculinity. And one particularly poignant incident occurred when Gacy was just 4 years old. His father would beat him for accidentally disarranging car engine components, an event that Gacy would recall as one of his earliest childhood memories. And this incident just exemplified the harsh and unforgiving nature of his father's treatment, which often centered around perceived failures and inadequacies. So just the first ingredient in our serial killer stew, okay? Nature, nurture, nurture, bad. But in contrast to his father's cruelty, Gacy's mother, Marion Elaine Robinson, attempted to shield her son from the abuse, so that's good, at least. However, this protective behavior inadvertently fostered a deep-seated resentment in Gacy towards both his father and expectations placed upon him. And the dichotomy between his parents' treatment created a very complex emotional landscape for the young Gacy, one that would influence his interpersonal relationship and psychological development in the years to come. And Gacy's childhood would be further complicated by a series of health issues. He developed a heart condition that led to frequent hospitalizations, and rather than his father offering him support, like a good dad does, his father just accused him of feigning illness for attention, just deepening the rift between the two. And this lack of paternal empathy during times of physical vulnerability likely contributed to Gacy's feeling of isolation and inadequacy. And the extent of Gacy's health problems became more pronounced during his teenage years. Between the ages of 14 and 18, he spent nearly a year in hospitals due to unexplainable blackouts and a burst appendix. Kid had it rough, before he was an absolute monster POS that deserves to be in hell. Do feel bad for the kid, And these prolonged periods of hospitalizations really affected his education and social development. So the physical ailments combined with the emotional trauma of his home life just created the perfect storm of psychological stress during his formative years. And at the age 17, Gacy would experience another traumatic event that would have a far-reaching consequence for his psychological well-being. He would unfortunately be SA'd by a family member, an experience he would actually never disclose to his parents. So this, combined with everything, all the hospitalizations and all the treatment of his parents, was just a recipe for disaster, just another ingredient in the serial killer stew, if you will. But despite the abuse, the medical issues, and the SA, Gacy actually managed to maintain close relationships with his mother and his sisters, Karen and Joanne. And these familial connections provided him with some emotional support during his tumultuous childhood and adolescence. However, these positive influences in his life would not outweigh the bad. It just gets bad from here. And as Gacy entered adulthood, the effects of his troubled childhood began to manifest in complex and disturbing ways. The manipulative tendencies and violent impulses that would later characterize his criminal actions can be traced back to these formative experiences. And Gacy's childhood would also shape his interactions with authority figures and his desire for approval. As he grew older, he developed a keen ability to present a facade of normalcy to the outside world, a skill that would later enable him to be able to commit these crimes and get away with it for a very long time. So in 1960, at the age of 18, he ventured into the world of politics, where all good people come from. I love politicians. Working as an assistant precinct captain of a local Democratic Party candidate. And although this sounds like a really cool, impressive job, it was not met with approval from his father. Still, this guy still can't get approval from his father. He just completely dismissed his son's efforts by labeling him as a patsy. And the criticism just further strained their already tumultuous relationship and underscored the ongoing tension between Gacy and his father. So at this point, seeking a change of scenery, Gacy relocated to Las Vegas in 1962. And there, he found employment in an ambulance service before transitioning to a position as a mortuary attendant. The irony is palpable. And it was during this time at the mortuary that Gacy had a disturbing encounter that would leave a lasting impact on his psyche. He would come into contact with the deceased body of a young teenage boy. And in a moment of profound disturbance, he would embrace and caress the corpse. And this experience left Gacy in a state of shock and pleasure, and may have been the pivotal moment in the development of his later pathological behavior. And then upon returning back to Chicago, Gacy demonstrated a drive of self-improvement and professional advancement. Despite not having completed high school, he enrolled in Northwestern Business College and successfully graduated in 1963. And the achievement completely opened doors for him. It secured management trainee position with the Nunn Bush Shoe Company, where he began to showcase his business abilities. And the year 1964 marked as a significant turning point in Gacy's life. He married Marilyn Myers, a co-worker of his, and relocated to Springfield, Illinois, where he excelled both in his career and community involvement. And rising through the ranks of the Springfield JCs, a civic organization, Gacy would eventually be named the vice president and would be recognized as being the third most outstanding JC in Illinois, whatever that means. So this period of his life just exemplified Gacy's ability to present a facade of normalcy and success to the outside world, a skill that would come in handy as he delved into the world of killing. And it was during the time that he was with the JCs, Gacy would experience another pivotal moment in his sexual development. And this moment would be a homosexual encounter with a colleague. And this event would mark a significant point in Gacy's life as he grappled with his sexual identity, a struggle that would just continue to influence his actions in those years to come. And I'm not at all saying that homosexuality led him to do these things that he's about to do in any way, shape, or form, obviously. But him questioning his sexual identity led him to confusing roadblocks in his already very confusing mind, and obviously odd fixation with dead bodies. Glad we cleared that up. Let's continue. But Gacy's ability to maintain a respectable public image while harboring deviant impulses is a classic example of a psychological concept of masking in sociopaths specifically. He became very well liked in his community, hosting large summer parties that attracted hundreds of guests, including politicians and business associates. And these social gatherings just reinforced his image as a community-minded individual, a good guy, if you will, all while concealing his growing criminal tendencies. However, Gacy's carefully constructed facade began to crumble in 1968, when he was arrested for essaying a teenage boy named Donald Voorhees. So this incident would mark Gacy's first criminal conviction and resulted in a 10-year prison sentence at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. But despite the severity of the crime, Gacy served only 18 months before being released early for good behavior. That's crazy! That's like 1/10, a little over 1/10 of the sentence. That's crazy. And it would be a decision that would have tragic consequences for years to come. And the impact of the conviction on Gacy's personal life was immediate and severe. His marriage completely dissolved, with the divorce being finalized while he was still incarcerated. Womp womp. So this marked the end of Gacy's relationship with his wife and children, whom he would actually never see again, which is for the best. So the loss of his family and his reputation in the community he worked so hard to cultivate likely just exacerbated Gacy's psychological instability. And reports suggest that during the time that he was in prison, Gacy's criminal tendencies continued to just manifest. I mean, the guy was just surrounded by criminals. How could they not? He allegedly even tried to hire a hitman to eliminate his accuser, who was Donald Voorhees, the teenage boy, though his plan luckily and ultimately failed. And the incident just provides insights into Gacy's growing disregard for human life and his own willingness to resort to extreme measures to protect himself. So upon his release from prison in 1970, John Wayne Gacy returned to Chicago, where he initially resided with his mother. And this marked the beginning of a period of remarkable success and public acclaim for Gacy despite his criminal history, which is crazy. In 1971, he established PDM Contractors, a construction business that quickly flourished. And Gacy's entrepreneurship and charisma allowed him to build a respectable reputation within his community, effectively concealing his very dark impulses. And as he began to become more financially stable, he could purchase a home in Des Plaines, Illinois, or Des Plaines, Illinois for the French. You're welcome. And the year 1972 proved to be a very pivotal point for Gacy. He married Carol Hoff, a divorcee with 2 daughters, further solidifying his image as a reformed, upstanding citizen, which, like, looking at it now, he absolutely just did that for the image. I imagine he didn't give a flying shit about anybody that was around him. He just used people. And Gacy would immerse himself into community activities, volunteering for political campaigns, and performing as Pogo the Clown, the thing of nightmares at local events. And his involvement in these pursuits served to reinforce his public persona as a benevolent and civic-minded individual. But alas, he was a sick-minded individual. But that picture of him as a clown is locked in my nightmares. But in 1972, he would finally start to crumble into his violent tendencies. He would commit his first murder. And the victim was Timothy McCoy, a 16-year-old hitchhiker whom Gacy had picked up at the bus station. Gacy would lure McCoy to his home under the pretense of offering him a place to stay for the night. And in the early hours of the morning, Gacy would stab McCoy to death in his kitchen. And later, Gacy would claim that he killed him in self-defense, asserting that McCoy had attacked him with a knife. And this incident, however, marked the beginning of Gacy's killing spree, which would continue for the next 6 years. And the second murder would take place around January 1974, and this victim remains unidentified. All we know is that the person was strangled and placed in Gacy's closet before being moved to the crawl space after the body began to decompose. And all of this specific information was given as testimony by Gacy himself. And the third victim, John Butkovic, would be 18 years old at the time of his disappearance on July 31st, 1975. And John had been working for John Wayne Gacy since the age of 16. And shortly before his disappearance, Gacy and Butkovic were having money issues. And on July 30th, John and 3 friends went to Gacy's home, threatening to beat Gacy up if he didn't pay John the $300 that he was owed. Just beat him up. Beat him up, get some baseball bats, beat him up. But instead of paying him, Gacy let the 4 boys smoke weed and drink beers at his house. And after a while, the boys left, and eventually, later that day, Gacy encountered John, waving him down at his car. And following this interaction, Gacy convinced John to get into his car, and he would take him back to his home. And as soon as the 2 men would enter the home, John B. began to yell at Gacy, demanding his check, because beers and weed didn't cut it. And Gacy would then do his later on MO, and he would cuff John B. with handcuffs, and he would tell him once he calmed down, he would take the cuffs off. However, John B. began to threaten Gacy, saying that if Gacy cut the cuffs off him, he would kill him. And from there, his fate was sealed. Gacy would make John sit on his chest, and he would lay next to him, and eventually, he would just strangle him. And Gacy would plan on stashing his body in the crawl space, but his family came home, forcing him to bury John B. under the garage. And following his disappearance, the Butkovits pushed for police to investigate Gacy further, but nothing was ever done, unfortunately. Which brings us to our next victim, which was Daryl Sampson, who disappeared on April 6, 1976. Now we're in a shorter cool down period time, which tends to happen with a lot of serial killers. We have that really long one, and then it slowly gets shorter and shorter because they get more and more impatient and more addicted to what they're doing. But at the age of 18, Daryl Sampson was invited into Gacy's home under the pretense of a construction job, but shortly after would be murdered by Gacy. Initially, it was believed that Daryl disappeared by running away, but after police entered Gacy's home, his body was found underneath the dining room. This is obviously later on, after they actually found out Gacy was a serial killer. But until they found that out, everyone thought that he just ran away. And the next victim, Randall Reffitt, age 15, disappeared on May 14th, 1976. So now we're only like a month cool-down period. And he would also be discovered under the crawl space of Gacy's home during the police investigation after Gacy was caught. And his body would be identified via x-ray, and his cause of death would be a stab wound. And the next victim, Samuel Stapleton, was only 14 years old at the time of his disappearance. On May 13th, 1976, Samuel had just finished spending time at his sister's house and decided to walk back before his curfew. However, he would never make it home and was reported missing the next day. And his body would also be discovered under the crawl space of Gacy's home and identified by x-ray of his head that included his teeth. And his body was also found with a metal bracelet that his family and friends later identified as his, and this bracelet was actually used in charging Gacy with the death during his trial. And next, there was Michael Lawrence Bonin, who disappeared on June 3rd, 1976, at the age of 17. He was taken while traveling from Chicago to Waukegan, and his cause of death was strangulation via ligature. And his body was exhumed from beneath Gacy's spare bedroom. And next, there was William Billy Carroll Jr., who was known to be kind of a troublemaker around town. According to his father, William, quote unquote, when Billy was 14 or 15, he was caught with a .38 Smith & Wesson automatic pistol. According to what I've learned from some of his friends, he'd shoot it at people just to scare them. He used to like to watch them run. However, on his oldest brother's birthday, June 13th, 1976, 16-year-old William disappeared and was later discovered and identified in a shallow grave in the crawl space of Gacy's home via dental records on March 17th, 1979. And then there was James Jimmy Hakinson, who was actually recently identified on July 19th, 2017 via DNA match to his family, previously known as Body 24. Hakinson disappeared on August 5th, 1976 at the age of 16. And on the day he disappeared, Jimmy called his mother to let her know that he had arrived in Chicago after traveling from Minnesota from his home. And once Gacy was arrested, James' mother contacted the police stating that her son might be one of the unidentified victims. However, at the time, the police could only use dental records to identify bodies, and James' mother just happened to not have any. And it wasn't until his nephew told his father and aunt to submit their DNA to the Chicago PD, and that his body was then successfully identified. And the next victim would be Rick Johnson, aged 17, and he disappeared on June 8th, 1976. So all of these murders are happening very, very close together. And he would disappear after his mother dropped him off at a concert. Not much is known about how Gacy and Rick met. However, we know that Rick died on August 6th, 1976, and his body was found inside the crawl space buried over top of the body of James Hakinson. So at this point, he's just stacking bodies on top of each other under his floorboards while his family is living in the same home and just going about his life how he always does, with being a fucking clown and then having his construction company, a construction company in which he found a lot of his victims. He would just tell them that they could have a job and then he'd have them over, and then he'd do relatively the same thing over and over again, you know, either getting them drunk or handcuffing them, promising them jobs. It's just sick. And the fact that it took so long for them to find him is just awful. And then there is the next victim, Gregory Godzik. And there's little known about the disappearance of Gregory. All we know is that he went missing on December 11th, 1976, and he was exhumed from the crawl space of Gacy's home. And investigators were able to place Greg in Gacy's home because his wallet and some of his other belongings were found there. And at age 19, John Sick had recently moved to Chicago and was eager to start a life. However, he went missing January 20th, 1977. And later, during police investigation, he would also be found in Gacy's crawl space. And then there was John Prestige, age 20, who had come to Chicago to visit a friend and eventually stayed after finding work with a Chicago contractor. And he would be last seen on March 15th, 1977, and his body would also be found in the crawl space. And I know I'm saying, you know, victim one after another, but I think it's important to speak on all of the victims. As shocking and as sickening as it is, I don't want to breeze past any of them. So next we have Matthew Bowman, who was last seen by his mother at a suburban train station and reported missing by his sister July 5th, 1977. And other than his body being found under the crawl space, not much is known about how he came into contact with Gacy or how he died. And then there was Robert Gilroy, the son of a Chicago police sergeant. And he had actually grown up just 4 blocks from where Gacy lived, but investigators couldn't link any evidence as to whether that played a factor in his disappearance or death. And Robert was last seen September 15th, 1997. And unfortunately, his body would also be found under the crawl space at the age of 18. And then there was John Murray, who at age 19 completed an intense 18-month Marine training and enjoyed his time in Chicago with friends and family. And on the night of September 25th, 1977, he stopped by his family member's house and informed them that he was going out. However, according to his roommate, who worked for Gacy's construction company, his dog had been run over. And this claim would be corroborated by his girlfriend, who claimed that the last time the two had talked had been on the phone that night when Murray went missing. And following this incident, Murray would never be seen again. And when investigating his disappearance, his roommate was very adamant about not calling his missing roommate, which some believe meant that he knew that Gacy was responsible for Murray's disappearance, because that is very strange. And when investigators ended up digging up Gacy's mass grave, John Murray's body was among the deceased in the crawl space. And among the many items that were discovered in Gacy's home, Murray's brown suede jacket was found and used as evidence to prosecute Gacy during his trial. And next would be Russell Nelson, who disappeared on October 17th, 1977, after traveling to Chicago with a friend to work for a contractor within Chicago metro area. And investigators would never figure out whether that contractor that Russell worked for was Gacy or not. And his body would be recovered from Gacy's crawl space, and he would be 21 at the time of his death. Next would be Robert Winch, who was the son of a physics professor at Kalamazoo, Michigan, where he would live for most of his life, and then he would move to Chicago at the age of 16. And while in Michigan, he was kind of known for running away from his foster home. So when he disappeared on November 11th, 1977, it wasn't that surprising. And he would be last seen eating at a McDonald's with a friend after being dropped off by his girlfriend. And while at McDonald's, he would be approached by John Wayne Gacy, offering him a contracting job. And he left the McDonald's with Gacy and was never seen again. And while investigators would later search Gacy's home, they would find his tiger's eye belt. Then there was Tommy Bowling, who was 20 years old at the time he disappeared on November 18th, 1977. And at the time, he was struggling with drugs and had a wife and a 3-year-old son. And his body would be recovered under Gacy's crawl space as well. And the body of David Talsma would also be found in Gacy's crawl space and was identified by x-rays on his left arm on what would have been his 21st birthday. And his father reported him missing on December 14th, 1977. And next is William Wayne Kindred, a 19-year-old resident of 511 West Melrose Street, Chicago. And he was last seen near Diversey and Broadway, where police believed John Wayne Gacy picked him up. And Kindred's girlfriend, Mary Jo Paulus, had been searching for him tirelessly since his disappearance. But his body would be later found under Gacy's house in December 1978 and was identified through dental records provided by his mother. And then there would be Tim O'Rourke's body, who was actually recovered from Illinois River and was identified through fingerprints. And when his body was found, he was completely naked. And he disappeared sometime in mid-June 1978, and his age was unknown. So clearly something happened during that encounter where Gacy maybe couldn't get him back to his home, or some sort of ordeal happened where he had to kill him on the spot and then throw him into the river. And then the body of Frank William Landigan was discovered naked in the Des Plaines River in Will County on November 12th, 1978. And he was later linked to Gacy after his driver's license was found in Gacy's home. And then 20-year-old James Mazzara was found 3 miles away from Timothy O'Rourke in the Des Plaines River on December 28th, 1978. And not much is known about when Gacy came into contact with James, or when the first meeting was, or even when he went missing, but he was found nonetheless. Clearly, Gacy found a new dumping ground because he had so many bodies under his house. And the next victim is Robert Peast, a 15-year-old in Des Plaines, Illinois, who disappeared on December 11th, 1978. And he was last seen in Nissan Pharmacy, where he worked, telling his mother that he was going to meet a contractor for a potential job. We all know where he's going. Obviously identified later, the contractor being John Wayne Gacy. And when Robert obviously didn't return home, his family reported him missing. And his disappearance triggered an investigation that ultimately led to Gacy's arrest. And Robert's body would be found April 9th, 1979, in the Des Plaines River. And Robert's blue nylon jacket was found inside Gacy's home, linking his death to Gacy. And all of those victims that we just covered are all the ones that have been successfully identified. To this day, there are still 7 unidentified victims that police are working diligently to identify. There were 8 unidentified victims found as well at his property, DNA from the scene was unable to be extracted from them, and they just continued to be unnamed. But Gacy's ability to maintain a double life during this period was remarkable. He continued to be an active member of his community, hosting large parties and participating in local politics, and his construction business was thriving during this whole time, providing him with both financial stability and a means to access potential victims. And the contrast between Gacy's public persona and his private actions was very stark, illustrating his capacity for manipulation and deception. And as years progressed, Gacy's crimes became increasingly brazen. He began to take greater risks, sometimes committing murders while other people were present in his home. And this escalation in risk-taking behavior would just ultimately contribute to his downfall. And despite his efforts to conceal his crimes, suspicion began to arise within his immediate circle. His second wife, Carol Huff, reported finding wallets belonging to young men in their home and noticing a peculiar odor emanating from the crawl space. How the fuck could you not smell like 20, 30 bodies under your floorboards? I'm assuming she had her nose cauterized or so. I don't understand how you could just be like, it's probably nothing. It's probably just, I forgot to do the laundry or something. I don't know. I don't even know how Gacy would play that off. Like, he would just say that he was, I don't know, refusing to shower for years and just blaming it on his own fucking disgusting body odor or something. I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand how that's even possible, but I digress. But it says that every time she brought it up, Gacy would just somehow explain it away. So I can't think of anything else. He's like, oh, there's mold in the walls. And she's like, shouldn't we move? And he's like, no! We can't. So the turning point came in December 1978 when the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Piest was linked to Gacy. Piest had last been seen at the pharmacy where Gacy had been working, and witnesses reported that Gacy had offered him a job. And this disappearance would trigger a much more thorough investigation into Gacy's activities, ultimately leading to the discovery of the horrific extent of his crimes. So the disappearance of Robert on December 11th, 1978 marked the beginning of the end for John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. So police would obviously go to Gacy's home, and the police would scrutinize Gacy, and they would uncover a series of suspicious items that raised alarms, to say the least. And these included items belonging to missing young men, as well as peculiar objects that seemed out of place in a suburban household. And the mounting evidence against Gacy led to the implementation of round-the-clock surveillance on his residence. So under the weight of constant police scrutiny, Gacy's behavior became increasingly erratic. His attempts to maintain the facade of normalcy began to crumble as the pressure intensified. And on December 21st, 1978, the investigation reached a critical turning point when Gacy, unable to withstand the mounting pressure, made a shocking confession to police. He admitted to killing at least 30 men, quote unquote. A revelation that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Because to everybody around Gacy, they thought he was the coolest guy. So nice, very professional, you know, very successful, great family. How could this guy be a murderer? It basically shook Chicago. Then there was the grim task of excavating Gacy's property, which began on December 22nd, 1978. And over the course of a week, forensic teams meticulously searched the crawl space beneath Gacy's home, uncovering a horrifying scene, as you already know. And the excavation revealed dozens of decomposing bodies, confirming the extent of Gacy's murderous spree. And the process of recovering and identifying the remains was painstaking and emotionally taxing for all involved. And if we take a look at this house, it is just truly haunting. Investigators dug into his yard and realized just how many of his victims he was literally standing above at all times, which I'm sure was just a weird fucking treasure trove for him. It is sick, just a sick bastard. I hate this guy. It's just sick, especially with his family living in the house too. Oh, makes me sick. And he lived at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. And this place became a burial site for all the victims I listed. So when investigating his home, the crawl space housed 26 bodies beneath it. And they also found a body under the garage and one in the yard. And I mean, at this point, he was literally collecting them. Not only killing them in his home, but burying them in his home. It's like he had this possession over these bodies. It was just sick. And despite the extensive efforts of forensic experts and law enforcement, several of Gacy's victims remain unidentified, as we said. And this tragic reality underscored the far-reaching impact of his crimes and the challenges faced by investigators in bringing closure to the afflicted families. And the magnitude of Gacy's crimes became fully apparent when he was formally charged with 33 counts of murder, one of the highest numbers in the United States criminal history. And the trial, which began in 1980, captivated the nation and shed light on the dark underbelly of a seemingly ordinary suburban life. And Gacy's defense team attempted to mount an insanity plea, which is insanity, arguing that their client was not in control of his actions at the time of the murders. However, the strategy quickly unraveled as expert testimony consistently ruled that Gacy was sane and fully aware of the nature of his consequences of his actions. I mean, you're talking about a guy that could like fully function and have a full business, own a business, run a business, have a family, be well liked by everyone around them, like have nothing seemingly mentally wrong with them, and then they try to get the insanity plea. It's just, it just makes me hate defense attorneys. I don't hate them all, but I mean, let's not get into that, but they should kind of be in jail too. Anyway, Gacy's attorney, that is. And the prosecution presented a mountain of physical evidence and testimony that painted a clear picture of Gacy's methodical and calculated approach to his crimes, because every one of these crimes was so thought out and premeditated. Like, you couldn't argue it. And the jury, having heard weeks of gruesome testimony and examined the overwhelming evidence, required less than 2 hours of deliberation to reach their verdict. And on March 13th, 1980, John Wayne Gacy was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death for his heinous crimes. Whether you agree with that or not, I'm not upset about it. And following his conviction, Gacy spent the next 14 years on death row. So he had to rot a little bit, which I also like. And during this time, he granted numerous interviews, maintaining his innocence in later years despite his earlier confessions. So the guy just wanted attention, because he's a little attention whore. He's a little creepy clown attention whore bitch. And it's weird to see some of the interviews because it has him having all the documents of his known victims and being able to look at them, and also in confident state that he has no recollection of any of them, when you know he remembers every single one of their faces and everything that he did to them. It's just, he has a very punchable face during his interviews. But the final chapter of John Wayne Gacy's life unfolded on May 10th, 1994, when he was executed by lethal injection. Womp womp. And witnesses to the execution reported a disturbing scene describing what appeared to be a botched procedure, which I just call karma. The chemicals used in the lethal injection process reportedly caused Gacy to experience prolonged suffering, raising questions about the humanness of the execution method, which, you know, is fair. You know, I mean, he's a monster. That doesn't mean we, the innocent people, need to be monsters, but maybe it was an accident. And if it was an accident, listen, who the f cares? You know, he killed 33 people. In his final moments, though, Gacy remained defiant and unrepentant, which just makes it like, I just don't feel bad for him. I don't feel bad for him, like, even a little bit. And his last words would be, quote unquote, "Kiss my ass." Well, karma kissed yours, you piece of shit. But it was just his final act of contempt towards society and his victims, revealing that even in death, he showed no remorse for his actions, and now he's just rotting in the deepest depths of hell, burning every second of every day and every night, and I sleep well at night knowing that. But I digress. Gacy's psychological profile revealed a complex tapestry of disorders and motivations, because I do like to get into that, like how the hell does somebody become this? How do people commit these crimes and just go about their lives like nothing ever happened? His behavior exhibited strong narcissistic personality traits, evident in his manipulation of both the police and media throughout the investigation and the trial. And this narcissism was even further exemplified by his lack of remorse, as he shows no empathy for his victims and even mocked their families at some points. And the question of whether Gacy suffered from dissociative identity disorder, or DID, remained contentious, as he inconsistently consistently claimed to have multiple personalities at various points during and after the trial. I feel like that was just the defense trying to say that he was insane, and this was just like a way of trying to manipulate the jury, which is just, you're not fooling me, buddy. You're dead. Who am I talking to? Not you, because you're down there. Anyway, and the motivations behind Gacy's crimes were just multifaceted. Extending beyond mere sexual gratification, his actions were deeply rooted in a desire for power and control. And the act of his victims begging for their lives before killing them served to reinforce his sense of dominance. Something that he didn't have as a child when his father was dominating him, which I do think coincides with how he went about killing people. But this need for control may have also stemmed from his internal conflicts, particularly regarding his sexuality as well, which I'm sure is a factor. And despite being married twice, Gacy primarily targeted young men, leading some experts to theorize that he struggled with repressed homosexual urges, which may have fueled his rage and violent tendencies. And the Gacy case also led to significant reforms in law enforcement procedures, particularly handling cases of missing persons. The removal of the 72-hour waiting period for reporting missing children was incorporated into the Missing Child Recovery Act of 1984, ultimately contributing to the establishment of the Amber Alert system, which, again, just a positive out of something so huge and negative. But a 72-hour waiting period is fucking crazy. Like, even back then, like that, I can't even, what? Like, I know a lot of kids ran away, but my lord. My lord. But Gacy's crimes had a lasting impact on criminal profiling techniques, highlighting the importance of understanding the psychological profiles of serial killers. And the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have since developed more sophisticated methods of identifying and tracking potential serial offenders. And these advancements draw on insights gained from analyzing Gacy's behavior and his modus operandi, or MO, contributing to the evolution of investigative practices in the field of criminal psychology. But all in all, giant piece of shit that I am glad is not breathing the same oxygen as all you beautiful babies. All my beautiful babies. I just want you to be safe. I want you to be safe out there. But that is all for the John Wayne Gacy case, the killer clown case. You guys wanted for me to do a deep dive, so I hope that was deep enough for you. Let me know what other deep dives you want to see down below. I always love reading the comments and seeing what you guys want to deep dive into with me. If you like the video, like the video. If you want to subscribe, subscribe. This is obviously the best YouTube channel ever. And also, what's the last thing?